related. But as I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, know, we are back to our regular scheduled genocide. So the short lived and violated pause of Israel has continued. And this just shows the futility of the pause. It's good that they got a little bit of breathing room. But what does it mean to have a pause where you know that in 4 or 5 days the bombs are going to keep dropping over your head, kids are going to continue dying at a rate of 40 to 50% of all of the deaths that are 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 we're seeing out of Gaza. So a pause to a genocide like that, how dystopian of a world do you have to be in? Can you imagine, you know, an agreement with Hitler to stop the genocide of Jewish people for 4 days? Like what? Okay, but what's the outcome here? Are we actually trying to stop this genocide, or just pause it, or delay it? Like so, the regular scheduled genocide has returned. As Richard Medhurst puts it in the following clip. Let me see if I can pull it up. More than 100 people have already died since 7 a.m. So less than 24 hours.
And
Not
those
even
those
hours.
numbers are questionable. Those are just confirmed deaths, but I
Yeah,
hear you.
yeah. And
It's
this was a tweet from like 4 hours ago, so the numbers are probably way a bit higher now. But
who's counting, who's counting people who have been dehydrated? The Gaza Health Ministry is barely mobile at this point. Some of them have been murdered. We're
mhm,
watching our heroic journalists that we become so connected to thanks to Sean King, and I forget all the other, influences, but I'm hoping some more of them, like Black Lives Matter and different movements pick this up. It's got to go more liberal. It's got to go a little more mainstream. We got nothing in the mainstream really right now. The Weekend donated what was it, like 3 million
yeah,
meals?
yeah, yeah,
But what's 3 million meals with an Israeli blockade? I mean,
right.
that's the liberal charity model, which even without a blockade is very faulty. But of course, that would come as some type of godsend, and it's not like Sisi, the dictator in Egypt, is cooperating. He's aligned with the axis of genocide.
No, you're absolutely right. Um, I mean, even very moderate folks, people who definitely toe the line of empire on 90% of things or 95% of things, people like Mehdi Hassan. What happened to him just because he's been critical of the Israeli state over the last 50 some days, and before that as well. But he's not critical in the way that we are. He doesn't understand structurally the role that Israel plays for U.S. imperialism, because that would force him to also be critical in these other areas, not just with the question of Palestine. But even this very mild liberal critique of Zionism, of Israel, of this ongoing genocide, is censored. It just removed the show that he had on MSNBC, I believe. So it's getting to a very scary point, Danny. And I mentioned this last stream, but I had an interview with Rick Sanchez earlier this week on the topic of censorship and the repression of the state, specifically with the question of Palestine. And they mentioned that the state is going to start cracking down on students that are protesting in favor of a ceasefire. Um, and the question is, when we look at the statistics of the people in favor of a ceasefire from 18 to 35 years old, we're talking 80 something percent. And that's the age range of the people in college. So if you got a state that's saying that they're going to repress people um, showing solidarity with Palestine, or that have some sense of sympathy for the Palestinian plight, and the people in that age range in college are 80 something percent in favor of the Palestinian plight, what's implied there is that most college students are going to be repressed in some form. So, there was a question here that arose, not this one, there was another one from Blade on do we see a new Red Scare coming? Absolutely. This was a topic I talked about yesterday. We put out the highlight. We put out 13 highlights from the last stream a couple days ago. Um, and what I think makes our situation new is the fact that whereas in McCarthyism and the other Red Scares during the First World War, um, the people that were dissenters, that were going against the grain, were a minority. They were a minority. Today, I don't think the forces of dissent, I don't think the U.S. has ever seen forces of dissent as large as the ones we're seeing today, especially amongst the youth. And that makes repression a little bit more difficult. It's easy to repress a minority in a population and have the rest of the population that doesn't agree with them turn the blind eye. It's harder to successfully repress and coerce when the group that you're coercing is the vast majority of society. Um, so that creates a new level of profundity and depth um, to the repression. They're going to have to repress more, and things can't change. The material conditions that people are in are what are moving them to these points where they're able to make these connections between their plight and their struggles here at home and the plight of the Palestinians, and connect the ruling class responsible for each. And the conditions that they're in right now are not going to be improved within the existing social system. It's impossible. It is, literally impossible for them to improve unless there's a social revolution. So the ruling class, I think, is in deep shit, and it's going to be uh, an interesting decade that we're going to walk into.
The contradictions are extremely heightened. There's also such super alienation among our class. I work with youth, not just the college students, but I teach boxing in the Bronx, and I was talking to a bunch of 16-year-olds, and sometimes Carlos is had teachers and mentors. Like, of course, we got favorite students, the students who bring the passion that mirrors who we are. I mean, those are going to be our favorite students. I mean, come on. I have a class where it's like three or four, really dedicated, and they're hungry, and they, at this point, they understand the Palestinian struggle, and other students are like checked out. So who are going to be my favorite students? Nonetheless, these are 16-year-olds. These are 16-year-olds in a boxing group I have in Carlos. They, when the stuff first broke out, I let one of them know. I had to let him know. I was like, "Yo, you my little homie, known you for a few years," and I broke it down to them. That's tough. That's tough for a 16-year-old. And then they came back to me, and on Thanksgiving Day, they told me they felt obligated to let their family know. I mean, this is heavy, heavy stuff, because we've come of age with the Holocaust as a historical reference point, a moral reference point, a big part of our socialization from AP US history to the seventh grade to, as Americans, as Jewish Americans. And these are interesting things to look at. So we have to, like Bob Marley reminds us, teach the children the truth. But I swear, Carlos, like liberalism, more people are offended that we would charge, like Malcolm X and Paul Robeson. They charged the U.S. with genocidal campaigns against Black America, and they went to the UN. People are more offended by our charging genocide than the concrete reality of genocide. I mean, what water does Gaza have? It's all PR from Israel, this trickle of pathetic aid trucks, when the UN workers are just killed.